That is the new para we have to do. The para above that, which is a very big para, we have read it. You have explained half of it to us.
So tell me where we have to.
But from the bottom, about 12 or 13 lines above, is therefore this mutual inclusion is spiritual.
I've got. Yeah, I have got it.
So you have to explain from there.
Right. Okay. So we read from there. So therefore, this mutual inclusion is spiritual and psychological. In other words, mutual inclusion is what? That means the transcendent, the cosmic, and the individual the experiences can all exist together simultaneously. Normally it does not. But when it is spiritual and psychological, this mutual inclusion is possible. That's what he's saying. In the spiritual planes of consciousness, okay, you can experience them separately, either the transcendent or the cosmic or the individual. But it is possible that the mutual inclusion is there. All the three are there together, and it is spiritual and psychological. Now, it's a translation of the two forms of the many. Okay? It's a translation of the two forms of the many. Which are the two forms of the many? The physical world and the subtle world. Okay? All and the individual. The two forms of the many, all and individual. Okay? Many is the all and the individual. All these things can be experienced together into a unifying spiritual experience. A translation of the eternal unity of the one and the many. When God can be absolutely transcendental, or he can also be in the many. So similarly, a human being also can experience it if he goes sufficiently high. That's what it is saying. A translation of the eternal unity of the one and the many. But when the individual, as a human being, is going up step by step on the staircase of existence, he can experience one of them together, one of them one by one. But he can't explain all of them together unless he goes to the right at the top of the staircase. Okay, that's what he's saying. But the divine is already at the top, so he can be anywhere he wants. He can be at the highest level, he can be in the middle level, he can be at the rock bottom of the staircase. That's what he's saying. Okay, the eternal unity of the many, differentiating and undifferentiating itself in the cosmos. Oh, I remember we read this. Differentiating is coming down. Okay? The one differentiating himself into the many is a coming down. That's the involution. That's the involution. And undifferentiating itself in the cosmos is the going up, because the differences are getting reduced. The many are slowly disappearing and you are going towards the oneness. So that's the undifferentiating. So many differentiating is coming down, involution, and undifferentiating is going up. Okay? The many differentiating is the divine coming down, and the undifferentiating is the human being going up. This means that cosmos and individual are manifestations of a transcendent self. Level 1 and level 2 are both only incomplete, and they are the manifestations of the third level. That's what Sanjay is saying. The third level creates the second level, and finally the last level at the lowest bottom. Okay? The transcendent self, who is the individual being, although he seems to be divided and distributed, he is actually not distributed at all. This is the Gita. Okay? I think we did this also. I remember. What he is saying is that the differentiating is only in the surface being. When you go deep into yourself, you see that there is no differentiation at all. There is the you see the oneness of the thing. You can compare that to a certain extent to, let's say, a picture which has been cut up into a jigsaw puzzle. Okay, a jigsaw puzzle. When you are at the lowest level, you see only the pieces. You don't see the whole picture. But when you go up into the higher consciousness, you start seeing the whole picture. You see the one, and you go to the third level, you see both. You see the, you see both. You see the oneness and the many. That's what Sri is saying. Therefore, all is in each. Therefore, the all means the universe. Okay, the all is in each. The infinite is in each finite, and each is in all. That means the each also is in the all. That's a including, and the other is the divine in everything. Therefore, all is in each. The all is the cosmos. The cosmos is in each thing in a condensed manner. In other words, every human being is having the condensed universe within himself. That's why he can also expand. It's like a computer when you are compressing. Okay, what do they call it? Zipping. Okay, you zip the whole cosmos into yourself. That's what the divine has done. Now yoga will be unzipping the cosmos within you. You unzip and you become the cosmos. You lose your identification with a limited form and you become the cosmos. That's what he's saying. Therefore, all is in each and each is in all, and all is in God and God in all. So all is in each and each in all is level 1, level 2. But now he's bringing in God at level 3. He is also there everywhere. Okay? So you have these 3 levels, and all the 3 levels exist together and can fuse and interfuse. Okay? That's what he's saying in the last sentence. We'll read that. Therefore, all is in each and each is in all, and all is in God and God in all. Okay? So all the 3 levels are possible: transcendent, cosmic, and individual. And when the liberated soul comes into union with the transcendent, that's highest, it has this self-experience of itself and cosmos, which is translated psychologically into a mutual inclusion and a persistent existence of both in a divine union, which is at once a oneness and a fusion and an embrace. Now that's interesting. You just see a oneness, okay, all are one, and a fusion, they are separate, but they are all fused into one, and an embrace is you are the individual and the divine is there separate, but you are embracing him. In an embrace, there are 2 people who necessarily embrace, no? Not only one. So therefore, when you are embracing, your relation with the divine is love and devotion. You see him and you embrace him. This is the separate, and yet you can. But the fusion is the one that is, you become one with the divine. So he is giving you 3. At once a oneness, that's the Advaita philosophy. You are really essentially the divine. And a fusion, you can become that. Okay? And a embrace, that's the duality. The individual soul is separate from the divine soul, but you can embrace him. There is a possibility of a relation of love and devotion. So that's what he's saying, all the 3. Okay? So this is what he's saying. Now, if you want, let me see if I can summarize the whole thing for you. Okay? Now, he's saying in para, but when man attains to the cosmic consciousness, he does not enter the universal being only, but something else which includes both. And that's the transcendent. The transcendent creates the cosmos. The transcendent creates the cosmos. Just 1 second. Yeah, the transcendent creates the cosmos, and the cosmos produces the individual. So the cosmic consciousness includes universe as well as the individual. So just think a little. The cosmic consciousness includes the universe as well as the individual. The individual is experiencing the cosmic consciousness. Cosmos and individual are always related to each other. Not only does the cosmos include the individual, but the individual also includes the cosmos within himself. He sees the whole universe within himself. Then, but we must note here that in these spiritual experiences, we are using mental language, which is not suited at all for supramental experiences. This inclusion of cosmos in the individual is spiritual and psychological. It's not physical. You are part of the universe physically, but psychologically, the universe is within you. It can't be there physically. Okay, that's what they're saying, spiritual and psychological. Cosmos and individual are created by the transcendental. Transcendental is original and it's creating the cosmos, and the cosmos is creating the individual, which is indivisible and always one. In the physical world, although you see the multiplicity, you can also go to the cosmic consciousness and see the one. You don't see the one in the lower level because your instruments of knowledge are defective. But if you sharpen them, you will be able to, even when you are in the body, you will be able to see the oneness. Okay? Which is indivisible and always one. The Gita's expression is avibhaktam, undivided yet seeming to be divided. Avibhaktam vibhaktam eva tishtati. In the lower realms of cosmos and individual, division is only an appearance. It's not the truth. It's an appearance. The underlying unity is always present. The spiritual reality is finally experienced as threefold. The one in the many in the one, and the one becoming the many. So this is the way you see. You see the one in the many. You see God in everything. And you see the many in the God. I told you the one in the many is the apprehensive consciousness. The many in the one, comprehensive consciousness. You comprehend everything. Everything is in you. And the one becoming the many also. Okay? That also. You see that the divine is becoming the many. So this is said in this paragraph. Now we can go to the next paragraph. The normal experience. Shall we read? Can we read the next one?
Do you want me to read?
Yes, please do that. The normal experience. Go ahead, read.
The normal experience of the reason, therefore, is not applicable to these higher truths. In the first place, the ego is the individual only in the ignorance. There is a true individual who is not the ego and still has an eternal relation with all other individuals, which is not egoistic or self-separated, but of which the essential character is practical mutuality founded in essential unity. The mutuality founded in unity is the whole secret of the divine existence in its present manifestation. It must be the basis of anything to which we can give the name of a divine life. But secondly, we see that the whole difficulty and confusion into which the normal reason falls is that we are speaking of a higher and illuminable self-experience founded on divine infinities, and yet are applying to it a language formed by this lower and limited experience, which founds itself on infinite appearances and the separative definitions by which we try to distinguish and classify the phenomena of the material universe. Thus, we have to use the word individual and speak of the ego and the true individual, just as we speak sometimes of the apparent and the real man. Evidently, all these words, man, apparent, real, individual, true, have to be taken in a very relative sense and with a full awareness of their imperfection and inability to express the things that we mean. By individual, we mean normally something that separates itself from everything else and stands apart. Though in reality, there is no such thing anywhere in existence. It is a figment of our mental conceptions, useful and necessary to express a partial and practical truth. But the difficulty is that mind gets dominated by its words and forgets that the partial and practical truth becomes the true truth only by its relation to others, which seem to the reason to contradict it, and that, taken by itself, it contains a constant element of falsity. Thus, when we speak of an individual, we mean ordinarily an individualization of mental, vital, physical being, separate from all other beings, incapable of unity with them by its very individuality. If we go beyond these three terms of mind, life, and body and speak of the soul or individual self, we still think of an individualized being separate from all others, incapable of unity and inclusive mutuality, capable at most of a spiritual contact and soul sympathy. It is therefore necessary to insist that by the true individual we mean nothing of the kind, but a conscious power of being of the eternal, always existing by unity, always capable of mutuality. It is that being which by self-knowledge enjoys liberation and immortality.
Yeah, and immortality. Okay, so he's explaining what we normally understand by the individuality. It is not the ego. The individuality can have a form, but it can also be formless. That's the essence of what he's saying in the para. Okay, so you can have form and limitation, and you can also have without form, but the individuality is still there. Okay, so we go back to the beginning of the each sentence. The normal experience of the reason. He is talking about normal condition. We are in the physical world, we are identified with our body, mind, life, and what is the, we see the multiplicity, and we think that all the things that we see in the physical world are real. Okay? Therefore, okay, the normal experience of the reason, therefore, is not applicable to these higher truths. Why? Because we are seeing only multiplicity in the lower, whereas you in the higher planes, you are seeing also the unity. And you go absolutely higher, you see both. You see the unity as well as the multiplicity. So, in the first place, the ego is the individual only in the ignorance. So, when you talk of an individuality, you say normally you mean your ego. But the ego is nothing but a shadow. It's a reflection of your true individuality, which is infinite. So, this is what he's saying. In the first place, the ego is the individual only in the ignorance. Because in the other planes, the ego disappears and the true individual comes up. There is a true individual who is not the ego and still has an eternal relation with all other individuals, which is not egoistic or self-separative. It sees itself as one with everybody else. To understand this, think of the wave and the sea. Okay? The wave is a small formation of the sea. And when the wave thinks that I am separate from the sea, that is the ego. But when the wave realizes that I am part of the sea, the ego disappears. There is no ego. That's the whole thing, what he is saying. The sea is in the wave, and the wave is also in the sea. Now he is saying, you still, and the wave, one wave realizes that all the other waves also are part of itself. It's all part of the sea. They are common to, we are all common existence in the sea. That's what he is saying. Who is not the ego and still has an eternal relation with all other individuals, which is not egoistic or self-separative, but of which the essential character is practical mutuality, founded in essential unity. Practical mutuality, founded in essential unity. Let's understand this. Practical mutuality. You see them as separate, and yet you see them as part of yourself. Practical means in the physical world. Mutuality means you see the oneness of everything. But it is founded in essential unity. Not the superficial, but the deep inside, the unity is there one. Okay? This is what you have to understand. The essential unity is the sea. And the practical mutuality is each way beginning to understand that it is part of the sea. Okay. This mutuality, this mutuality founded in unity is the whole secret of the divine existence in its perfect manifestation. In the, this is a secret. You have to understand that difference is only false. There is no difference. It looks to be different. The difference and the mutuality, mutuality means there is a relation with each one. Mutuality. Mutuality is not absolute unity. It is founded in unity. When you say mutually, we disagreed, you are talking of two. So mutuality refers to the many. Okay? But also it means that there is a relation between the many. Huh? We are mutual friends, you can say. We are mutual, we had an agreement. We are talking of two, but you are including both in your statement. So mutuality founded in unity is the whole secret of the divine existence in its perfect manifestation. Both must be there when it is perfectly manifested. It must be the basis of anything to which we can give the name of a divine life. If you want to think of a divine life, you cannot have an ego, and each individual must realize that he includes everybody else within himself, and he is part of the whole. This is the nature of the divine life. The ignorant life is you see only separateness. The divine life is when you see the oneness everywhere. But secondly, firstly, you must have a mutuality. Secondly, we see that the whole difficulty and confusion into which the normal reason falls is that we are speaking of a higher and illimitable self-experience founded on divine infinities, and yet are applying to it a language formed by the lower and limited experience, which founds itself on finite appearances and the separative definitions by which we try to distinguish and classify the phenomena of the material universe. How can you apply a standard of limitation to that which is unlimited? And yet we try to do that when we try to understand. Philosophy is exactly that. All philosophy is, or all shastras also, are expressions in words of that which is beyond words. Therefore, it is automatically, it is limited and it is not the truth. That's what Sarda says, even in the synthesis. He says all shastras, they reflect the truth, but they are not the ultimate truth. We try to classify and the phenomena of the universe. Thus, we have to use the word individual and speak of the ego and the true individual. We have to speak of three things. The ego, which is the absolute limited human being, and the individual, which is a true human being, which is free of ego, and yet it can be, and the true individual. Okay? So there are three words which you have to distinguish very clearly. The individual, and speak of the ego and the true individual, just as we speak sometimes of the apparent and the real man. The real man is a self within, and the apparent man is a body-mind life. Evidently, all these words, man, apparent, real, individual, true, have to be taken in a very relative sense and with a full awareness of their imperfection and inability to express the things that we mean. Words are distorting things, and yet we have to use them when we are in the normal, ignorant consciousness. By individual, we mean normally something that separates itself from everything else and stands apart. Though in reality, there is no such thing anywhere in existence. The sea is the ultimate truth. The sea is eternal and infinite, and the waves are there, they come up and they disappear. So there is no such thing as individuality eternally. It is never there. Okay? It's only a phenomenon. It's a figment of our mental conceptions, useful and necessary to express a partial and practical truth. The word practical is very interesting because that's also what Shankaracharya says. Okay? The world is practical truth and the divine is essential truth. Vyavaharika Satta and Paramarthika Satta. Parama Artha, the supreme reality, is the, this is also what Shankara says. So Srindra is saying the same thing. He is in fact using the word practical. Vyavaharika Satta. Vyavahara is the practical usage in the way. How I behave, how I vyavahar, belonging to the physical world. But the difficulty is that the mind gets dominated. The mind gets dominated by its words and forgets that the partial and practical truth become true truth only by its relation to others, which seem to the reason to contradict it. How can I become somebody else? At the physical level, not possible to understand. And that taken by itself, it contains a constant element of falsity. If you think of the I am separate from others, it's a falsity. It is falsehood. It's an illusion. Thus, when we speak of an individual, we mean ordinarily an individualization of what? Of mind, mental, vital, physical being, separate from all other beings, incapable of unity with them by its very individuality. At the lowest level, this is what we understand by individual. If we go beyond these three terms of mind, life, and body and speak of the soul or individual self, we go to the consciousness, we still think of an individual being separate from all others, incapable of unity and inclusive mutuality, capable at most of the spiritual contact and soul sympathy. It is therefore necessary to insist that by the true individual, we mean nothing of the kind, but a conscious power of being of the eternal, always existing by unity, always capable of mutuality. That's the true individual. The true individual is the true wave, is one that knows that it is part of the sea. That's what he's saying. And that is possible only at the spiritual level.
Rangana, I have a question.
Yes.
What is soul sympathy?
Soul sympathy means not emotional sympathy. Okay? When you have sympathy to somebody, which part of you is becoming sympathetic? You're vital.
Okay.
But the soul sympathy is essentially your soul is becoming sympathetic to the other soul. It's a spiritual mutuality.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Soul sympathy. It is therefore necessary to insist that the true individual, we mean nothing of the kind, but a conscious power of being of the eternal, always existing by unity, always capable of mutuality. It is that being which by self-knowledge enjoys liberation and immortality. The body, mind, life will never enjoy immortality, but when you go to the second level and realize yourself and your soul, then it is, you know that you are immortal. So that completes the paragraph. So now we can read the next paragraph. I don't know how big it is, but we can read it. It's not very big. It's about a page. Okay.
Shall I or Geeta, you will read?
Yeah, please read.
But we have to carry still further the conflict between the normal and the higher reason. When we speak of the true individual as a conscious power of being of the eternal, we are still using intellectual terms. We cannot help it unless we plunge into a language of pure symbols and mystic valley of speech. But what is worse, we are in the attempt to get away from the idea of the ego using a too abstract language. Let us say, then, a conscious being who is for our valuations of existence, a being of the eternal in his power of individualizing self-experience. For it must be a concrete being and not an abstract power who enjoys immortality. And then we get to this that not only am I in the world and the world in me, but God is in me and I am in God, by which yet it is not mean that God depends for his existence on man, but that he manifests himself in that which he manifests within himself. The individual exists in the transcendent, but all the transcendent is there concealed in the individual. Further, I am one with God in my being, and yet I can have relations with Him in my experience. I, the liberated individual, can enjoy the divine in His transcendence, unified with Him, and enjoy at the same time the divine in other individuals and His cosmic being. Evidently, we have arrived at certain primary relations of the absolute, and they can only be intelligible to the mind if we see that the transcendent, the individual, the cosmic being are the eternal powers of consciousness. We fall again, this time without remedy, into a wholly abstract language of an absolute existence, a unity yet more than a unity, which so expresses itself with its own consciousness in us, but which we cannot adequately speak of in human language, and must not hope to describe either by negative or positive terms to our reason, but can only hope to indicate it to the utmost power of our language.
So all these, in the lower consciousness of the body-mind life, it is impossible to understand the reality of the higher planes. That's basically what he's saying. Because that when we are at our level, we have to use our mind and we have to use language. But that's why he says that the truth cannot be expressed by words, but it can be slightly better expressed by images and metaphors. That is the reason why I always go into those images and metaphors, because it becomes very interesting to see what he's saying. Okay? Because when he's saying the fourth line on page 389, which are pure symbols and mystic values of speech. Okay, you have to use symbols, and that's why the symbol we use for explaining individual and the cosmos is the sea and the wave. Then it's so easy to understand, but otherwise it's very difficult. So when you use symbols and metaphors and similes, it becomes much easier to understand. Truth can be pictured in symbols, but not in words. That's what he said. Even the symbol is perfect, but still it is far better than using of words. Okay. So I can do two things. Okay. I can either just summarize the whole thing for you, or we can do it next time. What would you prefer to do?
Sounds good, I think.
Okay, I'll summarize it for you, and then if you want, next time we can do it more fully. Okay. So I'll try and summarize it for you. Okay. Just one second. Yeah, I got it. So he says more discussion is required for the difference between normal logical mind and the higher than mind logic. There is a logic which is higher than the mind. So we have to discuss. When we describe the true individual as a power of the being of the eternal, we are using abstract language, and that cannot be helped. But we may rather say that the true individual is, what is he? Is a power of divine, of being, of the eternal, who is individualizing himself for self-experience. Only an individual being can enjoy immortality and not an abstract power. Then we come to this. Not only am I in the universe, but the universe is in me. And again, I am in God and God is in me. And also, the transcendent exists in the individual, and the individual also exists in the universe. Further, I am one with God, and yet I can have relations with Him. This is impossible for man to understand at the normal level. How can you have a relation and still be one with God? How can God love himself? Okay, and yet we separate. So this is, but it is possible spiritually. The liberated man can enjoy God as the transcendent and the cosmos, but he can also enjoy God in other beings. Okay, that's what Srimad is saying. All these seemingly illogical statements can be experienced concretely, notwithstanding the limitations of language. So we have to be very careful when you are using language, it can distort the truth. That's what it is. Okay, so stop here today. Next time you can note down. Yeah, we can start with, but the normal mind.
Merci.
Okay, au revoir everybody.